Hi everyone, this is Sanjay welcoming you to this webinar sessions on job skills mapping for cloud computing. And so today's agenda, as you can see, we will talk about obviously to start with broadly what is cloud computing, and then types of cloud computing models, when we talk about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. And some of you who are new to these aspects of cloud would already be consumers of these services as users, as developers, but mostly as users, if you're really not into cloud computing as of now. So you'll be surprised how pervasive and widespread cloud is in terms of its adoption, even today. Okay. And why cloud computing in 2020? That is very easy to answer, but again, we'll further explore this. Cloud computing life cycle, applications for which there is no dearth. Everything is cloud driven nowadays. So, and learning path, that is going to be the focus, right? What do you need to become a cloud professional? And we'll talk about the salary trends, which I'm sure a lot of you would be um, interested in, right? So let's first try to understand, okay, what is cloud computing? And I'll also give you a backdrop of what the prospects are in terms of adoption, in terms of, I would say, revenue, in terms of the global pie, where we are headed. So, some useful data points, we'll also talk about them. All right, so let's try to first understand what is cloud computing. Okay, so I'll try to put it in as simple terms as possible. Okay, so here you can see the definition, which is in a very simplified fashion talks says what cloud computing is. But even more generally, I would say cloud computing is a general term, I would say, for anything that involves delivering hosted services over the internet. That is what it is. Okay. So you have the pay as you go model. So again, you consume some services, you pay for it. So you pay as much as you use it. So it's a delivery of on-demand computing services from applications to storage and processing, right? Typically over the internet. And it's a pay as you go model. So in earlier times, what used to happen was that you needed servers, you needed a lot of capacity planning, so to say, in terms of infrastructure procurement and provisioning before you could roll out any kind of services. Today, if you want to, let's say, a lot of startups have happened. Let's talk about one of the big names, marquee names, which is, I'm sure, very popular with all of us, which is Netflix. Okay, so Netflix, which is a Seattle-based on-demand streaming player. I'm sure at some point you guys would have used its services. Even if not, then still you are aware, right? So it's one of the largest streaming on-demand streaming services. It's been there since the early part of 2000s. So when they started their operations, they did not bother about any IT infrastructure, even in those days. So almost 20 years ago. So they already had. So Amazon is also Seattle based, as you know. Amazon is a biggest cloud provider, right? That we have in terms of market share. So Amazon was a Seattle based company, started as a book selling company, then kind of expanded into cloud services big time, right? So Netflix, when it started its operation, they did not bother about IT infrastructure. and their whole business was around IT infrastructure, right? Content. So, but how they will deliver content using IT infrastructure. So they used AWS from day one or day zero, I would say. And you see how big a name that is. It's a household name. Earlier, their services were only in the US, then they expanded across geographies. I think it's a global company now. So they started from ground up as a cloud company or as a startup which was using cloud computing. So it's very easy to understand, right? So cloud enables anyone to kind of get started in a matter of a few minutes to a couple of hours. So once you have an idea, once you know what you want to do, you can. That has led to mushrooming of so many startups globally, in Silicon Valley, in India, in China, everywhere, right? Because it's become so easy. So we are in an era where cloud computing has really come to the fore. So we've seen what cloud computing is. So let me expand on it a little more. Okay. So cloud computing, when we said they involve delivering hosted services over the internet. Okay. So these services are divided into three broad categories: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So we'll go over in some details as we move along our webinar or today's session. And then you also have the classification in terms of, okay, there you go. Infrastructure as a service. I was talking about like a cloud can be, so we'll come back to these three main categories because we'll spend some time on this. But even before that, the cloud can be private or public. Okay. So public cloud basically sells services to anyone through the internet, whereas private cloud is a proprietary network or a data center that supplies hosted services to a limited number of or to a specific organization, I would say, okay, with certain access and permissions. So regardless of whether your cloud is public or private, the goal of cloud computing is to provide easy, scalable access to computing resources and IT services. That's the underlying thing. Hope you guys are getting. So a lot of you would already be having some background, and all depends what is your objective in terms of being in this session. Obviously, all about the skills that, but I'm not sure about the background you carry. But so I'm being very generic and also talking about some very general scenarios, okay, regardless of your background. So those who are from IT or they understand this space, this is more of a kind of a revision of what they already know, but we'll take a deep dive into some of these aspects. So cloud infrastructure basically involves the hardware and software components required for implementation of a cloud computing model. Okay, so when we talk about cloud, it can be, or cloud computing, it can be thought of as a as utility computing or on-demand computing. Okay, so that's in general, I would say, about cloud computing, what we have. Okay, now let's talk. Let's look at the different type of cloud computing services. So we're going to talk about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So you have basically three cloud service models. Okay. So at the very base layer, let me show you this picture. This is kind of very clear. You have infrastructure, okay? So what you get when you subscribe to this kind of computing model or cloud computing model, you get servers, storage, and the network. Okay, then so I'll talk about the examples of infrastructure as a service, but then let's get a broad understanding first. On top of that, you have platform as a service. So you get operating system and application stack. Okay, in addition to what you already had as part of infrastructure as a service. And then finally, you have software as a service. So a lot of the services that we use, for example, this GoToWebinar that we are using, or Zoom application, these are all software as a service, right? These are subscription-based models at most of the time. So we haven't built any communication software. We are just end users of these services consuming, right? So Edureka has the subscription to GoToWebinar, and through that we are having this session. Okay, so these are some of the examples, I would say. Now let's try to understand. So when we talk about infrastructure as a service, it is on demand or pay as you go IT infrastructure that you get in terms of your services. So you get servers and virtual machines, you get storage, you get networks, you get OS from a cloud provider. PaaS or platform as a service, you get a on-demand environment for developing, testing, delivering, and managing software applications. So when you subscribe to infrastructure as a service, all you get is just the bare bone infrastructure, right? Which was basically your VMs and the servers, along with storage. But you still need a platform on top of that to build your applications. So uh, there are so this also these categories also have evolved over time. So initially, when cloud computing started, it was infrastructure as a service. That was a big deal because things had not evolved. And even now, some of the companies, they prefer, some of the organizations, they just go for infrastructure. They build the platform on top of that, and then they also build the application stack. Okay. So to give you some examples of infrastructure as a service, you have AWS, which is a public cloud. So within that, you have Elastic Beanstalk. Okay. So AWS Elastic Beanstalk is it's actually a platform actually. In fact, so if you talk about infrastructure, there are a lot of the cloud providers, they just like if you use the Alibaba cloud, they provide elastic compute service. That's infrastructure. You have host winds. There are a whole variety, but it's not very common to see. It's basically the virtual machines in simple terms. So for example, the Microsoft cloud, Azure cloud, you have the Azure virtual machines, or DigitalOcean, if you guys have heard about it, the droplets, those are that is a infrastructure as a cloud or as a service, or Google Compute Engine. These are all your EC2 is basically nothing but your instance. Okay, Elastic Compute Cloud, which is also known as EC2. It's a web service that provides resizable compute capacity in the cloud. Okay. That makes it easier to make web scale computing seamless for developers. So these are some of the examples of infrastructure as a cloud. Now coming to platform as a service, basically you get a platform, okay, and then you build your applications on top of that. So the beanstalk I was talking about, it is basically a platform, okay. It's one of the top PaaS providers, right? Because and again, it should not surprise anyone because it comes from AWS, which is the leading cloud provider that you have in terms of market share. So you can use the AWS Elastic Beanstalk to deploy and run web apps developed using a variety of languages. So it could be Java based, could be .NET, could be PHP, Ruby on Rails, Node.js, Python. These are some of the examples. Okay, so you can upload your code using the easy to use tools. And AWS Elastic Beanstalk handles everything else. So that includes deployment, provisioning, load balancing, auto scaling. These are some of the things that you would kind of really look at when building an application on the cloud, right? So Beanstalk is one of them. Again, you have Oracle Cloud Platform. You have again from all of the cloud providers, major ones, or even if you look at Salesforce, which was a cloud first company again into CRM, customer relationship management, completely built on the cloud, they also have a platform as a service. You have Red Hat, which was acquired by IBM a couple of years ago, that has OpenShift platform as a service. So you can build your own cloud stack. So likewise, there are many others, even IBM Cloud, Cloud Foundry, and some of those. They are basically nothing but your platform as a service. Next is software as a service, which we are pretty familiar with. So as I told you, like even we are using software as a service. So when you have go to webinar or Zoom, you have Gmail, right? You have any kind of email service. So basically, we are all social media sites, Facebook and all. These are all applications which have been developed, so we consume them. Some are paid, some are freemium. It means initially they are free, and then you have a premium model, and then some are free, right? Which are monetized differently, like social media sites and all. So software as a service, it's again a method for delivering software applications over the internet, again on demand and on a subscription basis, right? So a lot of the businesses are SaaS-based models. So if you talk about any kind of application software toolkit, it will be mostly a SaaS model. So let's say if you talk about big data, you have something called Hadoop. Okay, so if you guys have heard about or are familiar with Hadoop, so there are different distributions of Hadoop or different flavors of Hadoop, I would say. So Cloudera Hadoop is the most popular. Now, when we talk about Cloudera, they also offer CDP, what they call Cloud Data Platform, so which is again a subscription-based model, right? Likewise, any kind of computing you do, uh, let's say talk about company like Snowflake. Snowflake is data warehousing provider on the cloud, which recently got listed on Nasdaq 3 months ago. Became famous because Warren Buffett invested in it. If you guys follow the news and the investment themes that are there around, so Snowflake is again a cloud provider. most of the big companies that you see in the tech space, Shopify, right? Most of them, Zoom, all of these companies, they are SaaS companies. So we've talked about a lot of them, right? All the social media companies, your LinkedIn's, the Facebooks and Google's, all of these, they have offerings which are SaaS based. So when I talk about Google, it's not the search I'm talking about. They have a lot of other products, like they have TensorFlow for deep learning. If you want to kind of, it's obviously an open source product, but there are offerings in terms of when you want to productionize stuff, uh, when you build something. A lot of these are, most of these are based on the SaaS model or a subscription model. Now, let's talk about why cloud computing now. Okay. So, in fact, I'll give you some additional data points apart from what you see here. So, IT spending, if you see, continues to shift to public cloud computing. So that is creating a huge opportunity for IT leaders to enable digital business transformation, which means lot of jobs, lot of opportunities in the cloud space. So, for example, as per the latest Gartner research, more by in the next 2 to 3 years, I would say by 2023 or even 24, for more than 45% of the IT spending on system infrastructure, uh, software infrastructure, application software, and business process outsourcing will shift from traditional solutions to cloud. So, if you would have noticed, there were big powerhouses not so long ago, companies like Oracle Corporation, companies like SAP, which were very dominant in the business software space, companies like IBM. Not to say they are not, but their market share has gone down dramatically because there were other companies who came in and started providing solutions with cloud as the backbone. So they've taken a lot of the market share, and this is increasingly the theme. So that has led to two things. One is proliferation of niche cloud players, and the companies which have existed. Like if you look at Microsoft, it's a big turnaround story, but because of cloud. So it was in the business of Microsoft Office, and all these were productivity tools, right? It was always Microsoft Office and the licensing, but now everything you see is on the cloud, right? So even Microsoft Office, as you guys, the recent versions you would have seen last few years, they've been kind of rolled out on the cloud. Nobody installs them anymore. So even if you use Outlook, or so that has seen a marked change in terms of preferences, in terms of the infrastructure that companies have from traditional IT to cloud-based. And obviously, the proportion of IT spending that is being allocated to cloud uh, has further accelerated in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis. So you can see 59% of enterprise expect cloud usage to exceed prior plans due to COVID-19, right? So the spend on public cloud has gone up dramatically. It has gone really vertical. So that's the big theme, I would say, for the next few years. Because most of the successful companies you see in any of, so if you have a HR solution, nobody buys software in the traditional way that they used to. So, for example, ERPs were very kind of well entrenched in terms of how businesses were using software. to power their businesses. But now even ERPs are on the cloud. So some of the companies which started a few years ago, they've taken a huge market share from SAP, from Oracle Corporation, and others. So that's the big thematic change, I would say, in terms of IT infrastructure that has happened. So you can see in terms of the projection, how the cloud computing market size is expected to grow. And again, these are very, very conservative estimates, I would say. The projections will overshoot, and you have industry-wise or sector-wise breakup in terms of how the different industries will use cloud computing as the cornerstone of success, I would say, in the coming years. So this decade anyway will see a lot of big bang transformations, and it is all accelerated because of the pandemic and the way things have shaped up. So even if you see work from home, which was a privilege of the few, has become very widespread, right? Because you really don't need that kind of infrastructure. Everything is pay as you go, or cloud-based model. So that has really accelerated the adoption of cloud. Even when we talk about work from home or working remotely, that has really taken off big time. So linearly, we would have taken maybe another 5 years or 10 years to get where we are. Unfortunately, because of this huge accident, I would say, in the form of this pandemic, this has really accelerated the adoption many times over. When we talk about cloud computing life cycle, it entails everything that you would need in terms of building an application and rolling out successfully. So, for example, let's talk about any e-commerce site or e-commerce app like AWS, Amazon rather, or Flipkart or any other. So if you see, you can do shopping regardless of which part of the world you are, right? If you are having Amazon app, you can shop virtually round the clock, regardless of which part of the world or which geography you are in. And you would see the pricing also keeps on changing. Every hour they have new, it's all algorithm driven or machine learning driven. The prices, the products that they have, a lot of it is kind of dynamic. How is that happening? Because in the background, or the, I would say more appropriately, the backbone is really cloud computing. So one of the key aspects where IT has gone a marked, I would say, change over the last decade is in terms of release management. Now, what is release management? So you have everything running in production, right? These apps that you access through your mobile phones or your laptop or any kind of computing device, those are real-time apps, right? With transactions happening round the clock. So just think of it like 20 years ago, who would have thought you could do banking at midnight or in the middle of the night? You remember something and you have to make a payment. And now, even with UPI, with Google Pay, with PayPal, with a lot of the things that you have, these things did not exist even a decade ago, uh, not to mention 2 decades ago, which is not too far, right? So some of them, yes, PayPal and all, but I'm just saying these things have evolved big time. But now it's so easy. All the businesses are 24 by 7, powered by IT infrastructure. So I was talking about release management. To give you an example, the pricing of the products keeps on changing. based on the algorithm that these e-commerce sites have. So what they are doing is basically they are doing a release on demand. This release I'm talking about is software release in production. Okay. So earlier, when you had to make releases, you had to plan well in advance. So there were monthly release cycles at most large enterprise. So I have worked with a lot of the global top 10 banks where we used to have a release calendar ahead of time. So typically at the end of November or early December, we used to get, as part of the development team and maintenance team, we would get a release calendar for 2021. So it will say, okay, January, this date, mostly a weekend, or after Friday, you will have your deployments in production, then do all the testing over the weekend so that when the users come in on Monday, they don't face any issues. Now you are doing release on demand. You can't afford downtime. You will be out of business, right? Because the competition is like that. Everybody is doing things 24 by 7. Think of it like when things were completely in the physical world, right? We used to do banking during the banking hours. If it's the bank closes its operations, let's say at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, you can't withdraw money. You cannot you cannot transfer money. You cannot do any of the banking stuff. Now there is no restriction or there are no constraints, right? Because you can still bank even though the physical branch is closed where you have an account. It doesn't matter, right? You can do it on a Sunday, you can do it on a holiday. That's what has become possible because of the way IT infrastructure and provisioning has changed, and again led by cloud computing. So hopefully you guys have a clear big picture in terms of how things have really evolved over the last few years, or especially during the last decade. So primary driver has been cloud computing from an infrastructure perspective. Okay. So when we talk about this picture here that you see on my screen, which is about cloud computing life cycle, you can kind of have, it entails everything, right? What kind of hardware you need, what kind of storage you need, what kind of compute you need, right? So basically, there are two things to IT when you want to. One is storage, right? So because we're talking about data, which quickly gets into the realm of big data. Everything is big data now. Even if you are a startup or you are an old-fashioned organization, the kind of data that is being generated through variety of uh, channels, like there is machine-generated data, there is social media data, there is enterprise data, there is transactional data, right? So there is a data deluge. So you need storage mechanism. So that's where this big data infrastructure comes into play. And it's so easy to provision on the cloud. So with AWS, with Azure, with Google Cloud, what you can do, it just takes a couple of minutes to spin an instance, and then have your servers and big data infrastructure provision in a matter of a few minutes. You are up and running, right? So you need, once you have the infrastructure, then you need the firepower, basically the compute. So you have a lot of the compute services also as part of your cloud offering. So basically all this, define the network, set up security services, these are all part of infrastructure as a service, which we talked about in earlier slides. Define the management process and tools, everything that is, either it will be part of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and if you are using a SaaS model, then you're just an end user. So even the application stack is there, right? So, but let's say if you're just getting PaaS or platform as a service like Google Compute Engine, Then you basically need to build your application, you need to do your testing, everything, kind of reporting, dashboarding. That is what analytics refers here. And then you have a lot of ML services now, which are also becoming part of the cloud stack. So, for example, something like AutoML is has really been a big driver of GCP adoption. GCP is Google Cloud Platform. So you have SageMaker in AWS. You have a lot of the ML services as part of Azure. So all cloud providers have data services, machine learning components, which you can use at scale. Cloud computing applications, the applications galore. So everything is on the cloud. So there is no dearth of applications. Anything that you see. So storing file online, data backup and recovery. So simple terms, e-commerce application, business processes, everything is powered by cloud, right? So we talked about Gmail. We talked about Google Chrome. All these are so everything is on the cloud, right? The storage that you have. This brings us to the key focus area for this webinar. Okay, so again, cloud is a well entrenched kind of space. I would say this offers a lot of opportunity, but again, you need to be really clear in terms of what space or what kind of career path you want to have. Okay, so depending on your background, it all depends. Like if you are from a database background, from a non-IT background, or within IT, or from application development background. But broadly, I will say, so there are two paths. Okay, there could be potentially many different roles, and this keeps on evolving, right? So typically, either when you start off, you will be a cloud engineer or a cloud architect. Again, cloud architect, you will take some time to reach that stage because you need to be well versed with, you need to be a specialist, right? Even with a cloud engineer role as well. But broadly, I would talk about these two themes. So, cloud engineer, who's he or she, right? Is basically an IT specialist who handles all cloud computing duties, which include planning, designing, deployment, maintenance, support, right? Again, you'll have experience in developing and designing cloud-based web services. And cloud architect is for deploying and overseeing a company's cloud computing strategy. So you do the architecture and you see what works optimally for your organization and scalability perspective as well. So there are many aspects. I'm just trying to make it concise and make it easy to understand. Obviously, when we go into details, there is a lot that is behind the hood. So when you are a cloud architect, when you talk about cloud computing strategy, that includes cloud adoption plans, cloud application design, cloud management, monitoring, many of the things. Okay. So when you talk about career in cloud computing, it could be multiple things. So one of the things I touched upon was so just now I talked about the big data stack, right? So if you are good in data services, that is how I will classify it. So if you are keen on data services, you have a lot of the components available on all the cloud platforms that are on offer. So you could be a good web developer, right? You could be in web services and API development. And you could definitely take up that role. So let's say we talk about React, Angular, a lot of the front end skills, a lot of the back end skills. If you see the number one that you see here on my screen, database skills. So if you are a database administrator, you are a database developer. So cloud computing has something in it for everyone. Okay. So regardless of your background, and even if you don't have an IT background, it's not a big deal because it's learning something as a user. Think of it. So let's say if somebody has never used Microsoft PowerPoint presentation or Word document, do you think it is really difficult? Yeah, to know the features, you need to give it time. You need to make maybe hundreds of documents over the next few years. Your proficiency will be very high. Working with Excel and all these, because you don't have to build that. Microsoft already did for you, right? Same way Amazon, Google, and many others, Microsoft and all, or DigitalOcean, they've already kind of given you what you need. So all you need to do is basically think in terms of what you want to build. You should have a concept and more from an IT perspective. That was more from a business perspective. But from an IT perspective, you need to know what your interests are. So if you are strong in the database side, there is something in it for you, definitely. So you can do cloud administration, you can do, there are a lot of cloud monitoring services, and people specialize in different aspects, right? So when we talk about cloud security, it's a big deal because security, if your cloud implementation is not secure, you're going to run into problems, right? If you're good in programming, then obviously it opens up a lot of avenues. So because you need to be well versed with how you will implement things using the cloud infrastructure. So if you are strong in, I would say, networking skills or operating systems, more of, I would say, network guy or the desktop guy, you have again lot going on for you, right? In terms of virtual machines, in terms of provisioning. So there is something in it for everyone. So definitely you need to figure out what your core competency is, or even if you're new, then you need to figure out what your interests could be, what could potentially interest you rather. Okay. So cloud does offer a lot in terms of learning. So database skills, though it talks about it talks about MySQL as a database, you could have any kind of background. You could. I talked about Hadoop earlier, but I would say this is more of data services, which is a big space. I would say that is the most compelling space, if you ask me, as of now, because all things data, from data lineage to data governance to data engineering to platform engineering to data science, which is ML, big data, all of these things fall in this space. When we talk about programming, there is no limit, right? Obviously, the state of the art paradigms that you have within programming. Um, you have Python, you have R, you have Java, you have everything. All the stack is there. The cloud providers have. So you need to be proficient in terms of using cloud when you build your applications. Operating system, again, Linux, obviously the flavors of Linux are very, very common. Networking skills, we already talked about it, right? Virtual machines and the underlying hypervisor. And so as you kind of take baby steps into the world of cloud computing, you'll get familiarity with all these terms. So I don't want to overwhelm you guys with jargon and all, right? So these are the prominent cloud service providers. I've mentioned them a few times: Microsoft, AWS, and GCP, along with OpenStack. Mhm. So web services, again, you have SOAP, you have WSDI, UDDI. So let's talk about, so I've talked about this cloud software engineer, and these are indicative salaries. Again, this all depends on a variety of factors, but all we are trying to highlight here is you have a good career path which has longevity, which has durability and sustainability, because things are changing very rapidly. So again, for a cloud software engineers, again, you need to be good in programming. You need to be good with web services, with a thing called APification, right? Which is what we are highlighting here, APIs. You need to understand how you make calls from one application to another to fetch data, because it's a data-driven world, right? Cloud migration. So this is again a very there is a lot of demand, because I would say even not even 30% of the enterprises have moved to the cloud. Still a big journey lies ahead of us. So from on-prem infrastructure, there are companies who are migrating to the cloud. So you could be a specialist in migration. There is a huge demand for somebody who would come with migration experience. So you had those earlier databases, they are moving to cloud, or even from on-prem, let's say big data infrastructure, you want to move to cloud infrastructure. A lot of work is happening in this space. DevOps is another big theme. DevOps, I have already talked about some aspects of it without naming it, right? Release on demand. That's a DevOps concept, or a practical way of doing things. So earlier, what you had was companies had a development and operations team. Now it's kind of very seamless, so to say. So you don't really need to think and bother about your planning your development and infrastructure provisioning. That happens on the fly, especially with the advent of Docker and Kubernetes and a lot of these new age, so to say, softwares, or the mechanisms that we have in terms of infrastructure provisioning. It's become very simple. Click of a button and you get started, at least, right? So DevOps, cloud DevOps is in huge demand, I would say. And as you can see, the salaries and all are fantastic, actually, if you kind of grow in this area, right? So a lot of a big theme is automation. So that is where your cloud DevOps will fall. We talked about cloud application developer, right? So you need to be, again, very good with programming skills. So that's the core of it. And the way you learn it is taking a plunge, right? Embracing it. See, the more you practice, it's about like any other skill. The more you do it, the better you get at it. In terms of, we've talked about the cloud administrator as well, right? So again, cloud administration, which includes monitoring, security, a lot of the cloud infrastructure, which will come under your purview if you are a cloud administrator. Cloud automation, this is a big theme, obviously. This is huge. You should try to get into this space. Okay. So automation is a big theme, because why it's a big theme? Because it amounts to dollar savings, right? When you automate something, you eliminate a lot of the manual effort. That itself results in a big cost saving. Automation is a big theme. Innovation is another big theme. So these are the two themes that you should look at. And these are kind of intertwined. Cloud network engineer, again, very important, right? So we're talking about cloud security, uh, cybersecurity, a lot of the things. And again, as a next level, you have the cloud security manager. Cloud architect we have talked about. You can see the kind of expected salary ranges, or when you have this kind of skill, it's amazing the career path that you have. It's just not about the monetary part. It is the joy of building something which has widespread adoption. Think of engineers at Google and Amazon and Microsoft when they see that the kind of the patch of code that they have in production, it is in use by hundreds and thousands or millions of users around the world, right? That's the beauty of working at scale, and cloud definitely gives you. Doesn't matter you have to work at Google or Facebook. Even with small setups, your outreach can be really huge. We talked about cloud engineer role as well, right? So this is what we had to share in terms of the job skill mapping, or essentially what opportunity lies ahead of you if you want to make a transition or a switch to cloud computing. How, what does it entail? What does it take? What are the different themes that you have within the cloud computing space? And we talked about some of the areas where cloud computing is being used. It is being used, obviously, in a very broad-based manner, but some of the thematic plays, some of the industry adoptions, the numbers, sharing with you guys in terms of what lies ahead of us. All right. See you then. Bye bye.